Welcome to Cures and Capital, the podcast on value creation in biotech and pharma.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Simon. And today we are joined by Dr. Andrée Bates. She's the founder and CEO of Eularis. That's a consulting firm helping clients in biopharma identify how to strategically leverage AI to create scalable efficiencies and growth. So Martin, what can our listeners look forward to in this episode?
So we found a guest who sees beyond the hype and has also done it for a while. So the AI is not something she's new to. We will cover a little bit, of course, of the background. How did we get to where we are? We will also go over implementation challenges and how to measure ROI. So how can we actually attribute value to the AI initiatives that companies are trying to do? And then we will try to very practically create an AI strategy playbook for how companies could do it as well and how can they do it successfully. And after the interview with Andrée, Simon and I go over our reflections and takeaways. And as always, all views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our employers.
Now, welcome, Dr. Andrée Bates. Hello, Andrée. Welcome. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Could you maybe for our listeners briefly go over your bio?
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of Eularis, and we are a company that have been leveraging AI in pharma for 22 years to solve pharma challenges and healthcare challenges, and really focus on efficiency and revenue growth as outcomes.
That's very fit for this podcast, our themes here. So maybe you could, given your long experience at the interface of AI, digital strategy, and biopharma, you've been around the block for a couple of decades. Could you help our listeners understand sort of the context of today's state of affairs in AI?
Sure.
In pharma? So, I mean, maybe it helps set the scene and trace, let's say, the last couple of decades. What have we seen or where do we come from?
Yeah, well, since I really started, which was in the early 2000s, at that time, it was really more, well, AI was around, but what the industry wasn't really doing much. So they were really doing basic digitization at that time. And so there are a few things that contributed to that, which was one, the health records became electronic. People may not realize that at one point they were paper. So at that time they became electronic. And so that provided a lot of really powerful data. And then the other big thing that happened in that time was that the Human Genome Project was completed in 2003. And so that was the first massive biological data set. And that basically fueled so many different AI applications. So we started using it in 2003, but I personally, as in we, the company, Eularis, but I personally started using it a lot before that because I was doing my PhD in neuroscience and we were using it to validate our neurological theories in the lab. So when I wanted to start applying it in pharma, because I was already in the pharmaceutical industry, I quickly remembered kind of what we were doing with my PhD and realized that that was kind of a really good approach to solve some of the problems we were seeing. Then if you fast forward, and we were really started with things like analytics on predicting market share, predicting different channel impact, things like that. Then if you go kind of to the next batch of times, like 2005 to 2010, then we were seeing pharma companies really start to invest heavily in data warehouses and business intelligence platforms. And so we already at that stage then had electronic medical records. So this is where we got into real world data collection and analyzing genomic data. And in fact, the first project we did in 2005 was actually leveraging it to find rare disease patients. So that was kind of quite powerful because I was remembering this year that it's now 20 years since we did that project. And we found all these ultra rare disease patients that would have died if they hadn't been found. So it's really nice to think back, wow, those kids, they were children who were born with it, who would die by the age of 10 if they weren't found, are alive today and well because of AI. And then we moved to 2010 to 2015, and that's really when pharma really started to recognize the power of the data they had. We also had big breakthroughs in cloud computing at that time. So that actually made, really scaling it much more affordable and feasible. We also had a lot of social media in those days. So, social media started, I guess, around 2005 with Facebook, and also we have Twitter was around then. But then there was more and more social media. So there was social media monitoring, and In fact, 2014 was a breakthrough year because that's when Gen AI was invented. And so the first Gen AI started in 2014. And then if we move forward closer to now, 2015 to 2020, this was an inflection point because in 2017, we had more data generated that year alone than the rest of the history of mankind combined, which is amazing. But we also had lots of breakthroughs in image recognition in terms of medical imaging and pathology, natural language processing. And in fact, it was in that time period that the first AI discovered drug candidates entered clinical trials. Then we go to 2020 to now, and basically COVID kind of was the first sort of thing to really push us into digitization. But because AI was really starting to really grow and we had a lot more data, then COVID really was the prompt that got people to really be pushing for drug discovery with AI. And that's, there's been so many different things with COVID, like Benevolent and Deogen were two that basically looked at what are all the FDA approved drugs, and out of those, which ones are likely to be effective in COVID, and ones they found were actually effective. And then there were ones finding, like in silico, finding ones, new molecules that could be effective against COVID. So it really moved into that era. And then in terms of now, we've really moved from this experimental technology to business critical infrastructure. So more, how can we scale rather than can it work? So it's not just the technological advancement, although that's part of it, but it's really a fundamental shift in how the industry is approaching innovation, evidence generation, etc. All those sorts of things.
Wow, that's tour de force of, AI and digital is not in any way new to the biopharma industry.
No.
And you mentioned that the 2014 was where you mentioned that as a Gen AI milestone. And then we had in 2022, November, when we had this sort of ChatGPT moment and as another milestone.
Yes.
And I think that's maybe where it was the whole industry became even more aware of what is going on and the evolution in the technology. So how would you describe that ChatGPT moment from the biopharma perspective? How executives, for instance, how did they react and how fast?
I think it was a real watershed moment for biopharma executives because within weeks of ChatGPT launching, it went from boardroom curiosity to urgent strategic priority, where all the executives were suddenly saying, wow, we can actually leapfrog a lot of years if we start to figure out how to use this properly. And so compared to what we normally see in pharma, where things take a long time to get decided, it was really fast. There are a lot of forward-thinking execs that basically recognize the transformative potential of, firstly, the large language models in areas like scientific writing, regulatory document preparation, medical information responses. But this was also tempered by concerns around data privacy, regulatory compliance, intellectual property protection. And also a lot of CEOs were finding that they were fielding questions from boards who had seen it, but from their children or grandchildren.
Yeah.
I think it kind of just started the whole process.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And now we have 3 years almost from that ChatGPT moment. So how would you characterize the progress and today's state of AI in biopharma?
Yeah, well, I guess it's now kind of the reality check phase where, there was this initial euphoria of, oh my God, it can do all these things, which it can, but then everyone was just doing pilots on pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Whereas hopefully now people are starting to actually think through the business case. And I wish more people would do that. And I think that where success has emerged, it's really been in a lot of knowledge work, content generation, medical writing, regulatory documentation, literature reviews, clinical trial, protocol development, everywhere actually, really. R&D, market access, commercial, with personalized content creation, all that kind of thing. But I feel that the challenge, and there's kind of a joke, and I don't know where it came from, but I've been saying it for a long time. We kind of have more pilots in the pharma industry than there is in the airline industry. And it's so true. It's just everyone is piloting. And it's so frustrating because it's kind of random. People come up with a use case and they pilot it. Whereas I really, advocate that you should be strategic about anything you're doing, particularly in things that require investment. And so the way I prefer is to be strategic about it. And then you know what to pilot, not to just randomly do it. And so many companies have, 20, 30, maybe 1,000 pilots across different departments and countries. And so we need to start being much more strategic about this. There's a lot of other things going on right now, which is like regulatory maturation. The FDA has been issuing guidance on AI and ML software. We've got clear pathways. In fact, I think it was the FDA put out a thing that they were going to basically have AI throughout all what they're doing by June 2025. So that's now. So, there's a lot of things going on there. We've still got a bit of a talent shortage. There's a lot of people who are going into the space, but they don't really have the depth of experience that a lot of the earlier ones do in terms of all the different areas. I've had so many people tell me, like, I'm an AI expert, and then you find out that they're basically familiar with ChatGPT. Like that. So you see a lot of that. But really, the industry's moved from this Gen AI as an experiment to really viewing it as an essential infrastructure. But we're still in the early stages of realizing its full transformative potential.
Yeah, and you mentioned that actually the companies or biopharma companies, the organizations were quite quick in sort of reacting in some sort to the ChatGPT moment. Just to put another flavor to the sort of momentum being built, do you have any numbers for how much the biopharma industry is investing in AI?
Well, for a start, around 97, 95, I think it is, percent of pharma companies have already invested, but the spending trajectory is reported to be steep. So between 25 and 30, it's meant to grow from 4 billion to around 25 billion. So it's quite a huge increase, but that's predictions on, market reports I've seen. We'll wait to see where it goes. But I think that where that money is going to be spent the most is probably in drug discovery, because that's quite an expensive area and the advantages are huge in that space. But in all areas, there's so many things that can speed up efficiency and revenue growth, depending on the business unit.
So a lot of good intentions and the money behind it. So I will pass it over to you, Martin.
So let's discuss a little bit implementation. And I think we touched upon it just before a little bit, where you said this, there are almost two archetypes, the two extremes, from complete random piloting to strategic disciplined approach. But if you describe the typical pharma company, how do they approach AI today?
Well, there's not really a typical, because they're all quite different, but there's different approaches. So there's what I call the spray and pray methodology, which is quite common. People everywhere in different pockets of the company are basically doing all sorts of different things. But that's where we're having all this problem with all these pilots. They're struggling to move beyond that proof of concept phase because they're not actually getting any return, because they haven't really measured, it's not strategic. So, and I think part of that problem is that I see so many companies, they say, we've got a strategy. And I go, oh, okay. How did you do it? And they said, we had a brainstorming session about what AI would be great. And I think that's not a strategy. A strategy is actually looking at where the company needs to go, what the blockers are and how you're going to get there, and how can you leverage AI for that. So I think that's part of why we're seeing, 85% failure rate on all these pilots. And I'm seeing other companies that are really going with this technology versus business mentality. So, because it's a tech, it's a type of technology, it goes to the IT departments, and it's not really an IT thing. So I've actually had a top 10 pharma company come to me quite a few years ago now, but they said, okay, and it was a CTO, we bought Hadoop. I said, okay, I don't really like some technologies, but okay. And he said, what should we do with it? Can you come up with how we should use it? And I thought, yes, that sort of approach is the wrong approach. You should not be going, I'm going to get this technology. It's great. What should we do with it? You should be going, what are the business problems that we need to solve? And then you can decide what capabilities the technology is going to need to do that. So that's another common thing I see. And then also, while I'm on IT, it's that IT versus business ownership. So IT want to control the infrastructure because that's IT, but business units are wanting to move quickly. And so that's kind of a friction point, because IT bills are very slow moving. They take years, sometimes decades, and they don't go quickly. And that's why I think a lot of business units are just running ahead with their own thing because they want to move quickly. And so it's kind of that disconnect between the two sides. And then we've also got the vendor hype. There's every man and their dog are talking about that they do AI. I also have a podcast on AI in pharma, and I research a lot of companies that come to me saying, we've got AI. And I look at what they're doing and I think, let's see where the AI would be. And then I realize, they don't have any. They're just using the words AI. They go, oh, well, it's in the plan, so there's that sort of thing. And then there's also vendors that don't really understand pharma, that are promising all sorts of things without understanding the regulatory needs, and, all the back end things that we have to do. And then change management's another big issue. Even if you've put together a really good workflow with AI, I think a lot of companies underestimate the cultural transformation to get people to focus on changing the way they work with different things. And then, of course, the data. A lot of data isn't AI ready. I actually had someone tell me that you shouldn't spend more than $15 a month on AI. And I thought, what? I realized that we're just talking about ChatGPT kind of things. But, the data, there's a big data, AI is best when there's a lot of data that's combined. And sometimes that data's not good. Sometimes it's incorrect, it's inaccurate. There used to be the 3 Bs of big data, and now there's about 10 Bs. But veracity, how accurate is the data? All of these different things have to be looked at and integrated. So I think that the companies that are being successful today are really taking a different approach, where they're starting with a strategy that's really looking at the business and the organization. Where are we trying to get to financially, efficiency-wise, all these different things. What's the vision? What are the blockers? And then how are we going to leverage AI or other technology to get there? I think that's really how you have to go. And some companies are doing that. Roche has done a lot. Sanofi's doing a lot. So the industry's learning for sure, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. And there's so much to unpack here. And then spray and pray is definitely something I'm going to use going forward. But it sounds like a disciplined approach to also ROI seems to be a key pillar in your approach to AI strategy.
Yeah.
So what is the methodology for calculating ROI on AI initiatives to inform data-driven decisions on how to essentially invest?
Yeah, it's a fundamental part of what we do now, because we're seeing so many pilots, and we really always are looking at strategy from where we're trying to get to. How do we measure the efficiency and the revenue? I mean, it comes down to those. There's other areas as well, but those are 2 big ones. And it's a very different approach than traditional IT investment ROI, because AI can often generate value through time savings, quality improvements, risk reduction, as well as direct revenue generation. And so you have to account for both the tangible and the intangible benefits, while, managing the uncertainty inherent in anything. We have Osman on my team, and he has a master's in this. And before Eularis, he was basically doing financial modeling for private equity for companies that they were investing in. So he does these very complex but fun for C-suites to move to play with, because they can just adapt things and go, well, if I wanted to get to here, what numbers have to change? So we always do those now. But some of the things we're looking at are, firstly, direct financial impact. That's a really big one for most boards. So that's one. Operational efficiency gains is another. Strategic value creation. You can get competitive advantage through certain things, like something Roche did in 2019 was they bought Flatiron Health for the data. And they have a competitive window that no one else has for that oncology data. So that competitive advantage and strategic value creation is another one. And it depends on where in the business you're calculating and what initiatives. But for drug discovery, you're really looking at the time saved and the cost per day of development, plus the success rate and the pipeline value, the risk reduction, the regulatory cost avoidance, and then taking that from the total investment. But, when you think about drug development, it's cost about 7 million a day in late stage trials. So even modest savings can really give you really strong returns. 10% reduction in a phase 2 timeline can actually save you 50 to 100 million per program. So there's lots of different ways, but basically those are the sorts of things. And pharma's different from other industries in lots of ways as well, because we've got this long development timeline for at least the R&D side of things. We've got regulatory uncertainty, so we have to then do probability weighted outcomes for regulatory acceptance and compliance. We've got portfolio effects, so we can sometimes get, additional value from the portfolio simultaneously. And we've also got knowledge capital, so we can actually quantify the value of the institutional learning from data asset creation and capability building that's going to enable future AI initiatives.
And can I ask just practically, when you quantify these ROIs,
Yeah.
What is the trade-off in between very detailed calculation, almost project by project potential versus, okay, maybe some benchmark on a company that invests this amount of money could expect these kind of savings? Is it something in between or?
Analysis is usually pretty specific to the company. So we've just completed one, and it was really only looking in two areas, which were medical affairs and market access. But we actually were able to quantify by AI initiative exactly how many man hours per year are saved. So you can translate that into money, into salaries. Those people can actually be deployed on other things that add more value. We can also, because we've been doing this for 22 years and we're so deep in this space, we're pretty familiar, and it's kind of an educated guess, but I can pretty much tell from what percentage increase in revenue particular things are going to give you, because we have a range that we see for specific types of initiatives. So sometimes, so it's kind of those things. It's very, very specific. And it's not just, so we will do it by each initiative, but it's in one big spreadsheet. So you can see the cumulative impact on the different things. And you can then say, well, what if we take this out? What's it going to do to the overall result? So it's very much specific to that company.
Can I ask, so now you mentioned, of course, if we can increase the clinical trial operation, for instance, and save time, then we save cost during the trials and we get faster to market.
Yeah.
What about the people side of things? Do you also quantify maybe if you could do with fewer people? Is that an argument for, or how do you see that people aspect?
I don't look at it to get rid of people, because people add so much value, but a lot of the tasks that people are doing are wasting their time. So you've got these highly, in our industry, everyone's highly, highly qualified. It's not like we're a low qualification industry. And yet you've got highly qualified people doing really manual, menial things. And I'm just thinking of one of our clients. And again, this was in medical affairs from big pharma. And they had all these high-level doctors in medical affairs basically writing safety reports. Because even if a drug isn't even promoted anymore, you still have to submit a safety report every year. And things like that can be automated with AI because it's all from the data, and the humans can then check it. The high-level humans can check it. So those people can be really thinking through much more value-add problems than just writing safety reports. Or another good example in medical affairs is literature monitoring. Now AI can do that and serve up what's the thing that they need to be looking at, as opposed to them sitting down and reading 100 journals. And in oncology, there's 5,000 new articles per week. And so humans can't do it anyway.
Thanks. That's very helpful.
Just back to the ROI. I mean,
Sure.
now we discuss a lot of ROI, but could you give us some numbers on what
Sure.
ROI have you seen possible in terms of improving efficiency in our industry? And are there any particular segments in the pharma value chain where you saw greater ROI potential than maybe others?
And that you can get ROI in all areas, but I think the crown jewel is basically discovery, because there's been numerous studies that show that we can get 60 to 70% increases in speed to market and 60 to 70% decreases in cost. So that's pretty staggering when you look at the billions. 2.6 billion, I think, was the average, and the 10 to 15 years that it takes to get a drug to market. So even if you didn't reach that 60 to 70%, there's been lots of studies that have looked at it and come up with that. Even if you got like 40, it's still staggering, the billions and billions and the years. And you would get to revenue in terms of making money from the drug so much faster as well. So I think that's kind of where the bulk of the AI investment is at the moment. It's in everything. We've done projects in pretty much every part of pharma, but that's where the biggest spend is going, because that's where the biggest reward is. I think also clinical trials is another big area because that's very costly. As you know, we can get huge cost reductions in lots of different areas through streamlining the processes, automating the data management. Clinical study reports, it might usually take 6 weeks and a team can be done in an hour. So patient recruitment, which was a big bottleneck, can be transformed really quickly to find the right patients. And we've done a lot of that for rare disease as well. Regulatory, there's a huge amount of data that's required for regulatory submissions. Those can be done 40, 50% faster and reduce costs dramatically. Manufacturing's not quite as big. It's incremental, but it's still meaningful. So we're seeing something like 5 to 10% reduction in procurement management costs, productivity gains, 50 to 80%. So that's better, depending on the role and categories. But compared with R&D, it's a bit modest. Then in commercial, a lot, because this is where you're looking at revenue gain. So, we can do this hyper personalization and operational efficiency. So we can do really targeted marketing, automate the campaigns, personalize the campaigns by individual doctor or patient if you're in a country that allows that. Optimizing the sales force, there's so much that can be done there. So market access, we've got something like 650 data sources that are constantly changing in market access. When you look at any pharma company and their market access team, they're not using half of those because they can't. It's just not enough human time to do it, but we can get huge gains with market access as well. And even the formulary committees and the different payer authorities are using AI to look at these things as well. So I think if I was ranking it, I would say drug discovery is probably the highest ROI potential, then clinical. Then I think regulatory and medical affairs are big because there's so much that is manual with highly qualified people. And then I think commercial, market access, sales marketing, all of those areas have got really good gains as well.
Can I ask, because when you were saying these numbers, of course, a big part of our podcast is about R&D productivity and return on investment and innovation. When you were saying these numbers in drug discovery, right, about 50, 60% potential reduction in costs of getting to market and 50, 60% potential of getting faster to the market and so on. Of course, just high level, if we put those numbers into the equation, we could see massive improvements in R&D productivity and return on investment. But are these, as of now, more theoretical potentials? Because I assume we haven't yet seen a drug getting all the way to the market 50, 60% faster and cheaper.
No one is implementing all of the aspects that you can at this stage. That's why you're not seeing it. So there's, from every stage, from discovery through, there's so much that can be sped up with AI that would give you those figures. And we know those figures because we know what the individual things are. And that, there's been lots of studies by lots of people about this. But no company I have seen has done the whole process all the way through, which is a shame. We're starting to see a lot more. If you look at some of the things AstraZeneca is doing, so they partner with Benevolent AI, and so they have got AI. Most of their pipeline now, I believe, is from Benevolent, which is AI generated. And if you look at, I gave a lecture in March 2020 on what we were doing with drug discovery at that stage for COVID, and drugs that would take, years to get discovered actually were being discovered in weeks with AI. So doesn't mean that they're all going to work. A lot did, but it just means that speeding up that process. So when you might have been able to run 10 million compounds through something, now you can run 10 billion through. It's quite a massive scale change.
But that's fair. So the takeaway essentially is there's still a lot of untapped potential.
Yes.
So just to recap, so we have a lot of good intentions in the organizations out there. We have organizations willing to deploy capital towards AI. We have some very impressive ROI potential there, but still it's, in practical terms, we know a lot of organizations are struggling. So maybe let's try to make it practical, Andrée. So let's imagine we sit down with an executive team in a pharma company and they ask for help because they realize there's huge untapped potential in AI, but they're still struggling to get the AI strategy right and connecting to the overall strategy to the enterprise. So how would you approach a conversation with such an executive team to get their strategy process started optimally?
I have done that many times. When I sit down with pharma executive teams that are facing that exact scenario, I see the same pattern again and again. So these days, they're drowning in AI pilots, but they're starving for business impact. And so for me, the fundamental issue isn't technical, it's strategic.
Yeah.
Most companies have really approached it as a technology initiative rather than a business transformation. And then there's this dangerous disconnect between AI investment and value creation. And so the root of the problem is strategy fragmentation. They might have 20, 30, 100, 1,000, AI initiatives scattered across R&D and commercial, manufacturing, regulatory, medical affairs, market access, insights, sales, marketing, etc., all owned by different departments with different success metrics in different countries. R&D might be measuring molecular discovery speed, commercial might be tracking engagement rates and prescribing, manufacturing is looking at efficiency gains. And meanwhile, the CEO is asking, well, how's this going to help me achieve this share price goal, or get to our revenue to this place, or increase our profitability by X? So I think you really need to start with business outcomes, not AI, and so it's quite funny. So when we're doing a strategy, people are expecting us to ask a lot about AI, but instead of asking what can AI do, well, because we already know that, what we ask is, where are you trying to get to? What's the company? Nothing to do with AI. Where do you want the company? What are the biggest business challenges that you face? And usually it's things like low probability of success in drug development, or long time to market, or unsustainable rising R&D costs, or whatever. So, you're really trying to look at where are the biggest problems, where are they trying to get to, where are the problems? And then if we're doing one for an entire company, we're then going business unit by business unit to look at what the blockers are and how it can be done. And that's really the mapping. It's showing them that it's not an AI problem, it's a business problem.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And you almost answered my next question about how you would undergo a review of the corporate strategy and at what point you would build in the AI components. So it almost seems like you have this more holistic view. So it's AI maybe not that different from other strategy components. Is that correct?
Yes, well, it is and it isn't. So there's a lot that's the same and there's some things that are different. So if you're thinking of AI strategy where it's the same, you're looking for a strategy to connect to a business outcome. Same. It needs resource allocation. Same. It needs the organizational capabilities, portfolio management logic, competitive analysis, change management, governance, risk management, performance measurement, stakeholder, all the usual. But how it's different is its speed.
Yeah.
AI capability is changing monthly. And so it needs to be flexible and be able to adapt to this rapid technological evolution. You've also got a lot of cross-functional impact. It's touching every aspect of the pharma value chain simultaneously.
Yeah.
Where there's these enterprise-wide interdependencies. And then data as a strategic asset. The success fundamentally depends on the data quality, the data accessibility, the data governance. That's a core strategic capability that we need. The investment paradox, it does require upfront investment. And I think we can pretty much predict what the returns will be, but it's uncertain. It depends. Have they got the right data? There's some things that they need to get right first. And then experimentation is part of AI. There's iterations with AI. So rather than the certainty that you have with traditional business use cases, there will be elements of uncertainty with this. That's why all AI projects start with a discovery. You're finding what data, what are the risks, what are you going to do? The technical complexity. To do an AI strategy, you need to understand what AI can do, what the limitations are, what the infrastructure requirements are. The regulatory uncertainty, that keeps changing. We've got the AI Act in Europe. There's a lot that we have to navigate in terms of AI, but also pharma regulations and how these are constantly adapting with AI right now. The FDA is issuing new guidances all the time. And then we've got the network effects, data dependencies, and also the talent scarcity. So it's kind of a mix of both, really.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned the data structure and so on, and some pharma companies, they have like 100 years of data. So how big barrier is it that if you have this lake of data, whatever we should, a huge ocean of potential data, how big an obstacle is it to actually get your data in shape to unlock the potential?
It depends. I'm like a lawyer.
Yeah.
It depends. I remember one top 10 pharma company I was working with for something else. We were doing a next best action omnichannel system. This was back in 2011. And they were embarking on a data warehouse AI ready initiative back then in 2011. And we weren't doing it for them. It was like a global IT initiative. And I remember they said it would be 3 years and cost 300 million. 5 years in, I said, are you done yet? Can we use this? And they said, no, it's still going. And it took 8 years, because what they were doing is not what I would recommend. What they were doing was they were taking every single piece of data in the company, cleaning it, sorting it, structuring it, making it AI ready and combining it, which is great, to do projects now with that company. But I don't think you need to do that, because a lot of the data is pointless. It's not going to be strategically important.
No.
So the way I would rather approach it is really, what are the key strategic priorities and what data do we need for those? And then you can be doing these quick wins and you can be doing slower wins. In fact, when we do a strategy, we do a quick win one where here's some that you can get gains in the next few months. Here's ones that's going to take 12 to 18 months, so there's different things depending on what you're doing. But it's really about being strategic about it again, and we always look at the data when we're doing a strategic AI blueprint, of course.
Yeah, and I assume that now also models becoming increasingly multimodal. So I guess in the future they might be able to figure out, based on very messy data, make sense of it. So maybe any investments the companies make to structure data is maybe will not have a good ROI. I don't know.
Changing a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's so many tools now that can help you do a lot of that.
Yeah, and maybe a quick extra question now that came up. So also now we pretend we sit down with an executive team.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been intrigued when you see maybe the composition of an executive team and whether there is an AI executive in there or not, or at least at SVP level or some other. And also if you look into the board of directors, the composition, what is your take also that you mentioned that AI is very much a transformational exercise, not a technology exercise? What's the ideal composition of a senior management? How should you have an executive vice president of AI in every biopharma company, or how do you view that?
It depends what they're doing. So I think certainly the board all have and should have AI responsibilities, different responsibilities at different parts of the board. But when we're doing a strategy, we're looking at what the company needs and what we're recommending. And we do say, these are the positions that you need that you're missing for what you're trying to do. So that's always part of the strategy, to look at what they need to do and how they need to organize it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe back to this, as you mentioned, that we haven't seen any great number of companies who are really excel at implementing AI across the entire value chain and harvesting the benefits and the ROI. But you mentioned, we talked a bit before this, the pockets of excellence. Can you explain what you mean and maybe give some examples?
Well, so pockets of excellence are really where they have achieved breakthrough AI results, but in specific isolated functions, and they haven't connected it enterprise-wide to their AI capability. So I kind of think of it like having these world-class musicians who have never played together as an orchestra. It's this element. So there's lots of examples. Like Sanofi have got their Ply platform, which is a pocket of excellence because it's aggregating internal data for decision-making. So they can use it to do a lot of different things. But AI in general, at this moment, in that company is not fully integrated. Novartis have got some great AI in different areas, but again, not fully integrated. AstraZeneca, they're doing amazing stuff with AI in lots of areas, but it's still, even AstraZeneca have probably got more, I think they've got more patents and more partnerships than any other pharma company in AI, but still it's not fully integrated. I haven't seen any company that is like a Google or an Amazon where it's just the fabric of what the company do. But, well, there is, of course, Google, who now is a pharma company. So they do have it. If we're counting all pharma companies, DeepMind and Google are a pharma company now. Actually, Benevolent is a pharma company now too, because they started doing AI to sell to pharma, but now they're taking their own drugs to market as well. So there's pockets of excellence that show the transformation, the benefits in these different pockets. So we've got the evidence across lots of companies, but I think the battle will be won by the companies that commit to connecting all of these little pieces into an integrated enterprise-wide AI capability. Because then they're going to get that compounded value across everything.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. And do you dare speculate before I hand it back to Martin? When do you think we might see like a fully AI integrated pharma company?
We dare to dream. Well, I would love to see it in the next 5 years, but who knows? In 10 years, we should have. So already, in October 22, the FDA allowed synthetic data and digital twins in clinical trials. So when I was interviewing someone on my podcast who's doing that, who's a specialist in digital twins, I was asking when she thought we would have our own digital twin, and she was pretty sure it would be within 10 years, which is pretty amazing. So if we get to that point in 10 years, pharma surely will have done this by then, but I'd like to see it sooner.
Yeah.
I actually appreciate the fairly, not, I don't know whether realistic, right? But I tend to see a lot of these predictions that by next year, it will be fully transformed, the entire industry. And within 2 years, it will be altogether different industry. 5 to 10 years sounds a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, no, definitely not by next year. I can tell you from where I'm sitting, which is the coal face of AI and pharma. It's just not being fully integrated.
And can I ask, it's something in between what we just discussed between implementation and I assume integration. I think at the beginning you mentioned that some companies, or maybe even a lot of companies, they actually hand over this responsibility or they make it lie in the IT department. What would be the right way of doing it? Who should hold the pen on this? Of course, if it's strategic, it needs to be the board, the executive management, but who should then ultimately hold the pen on the execution, if not IT?
I think it should be the board, quite frankly, because I actually do a course on AI for board directors. And it's shocking when I have board directors in that program, how little they know about what's going on in the AI in their company. And I give a case study of a company that was still around, kind of Zillow. Their board didn't know what was going on with their AI, and they ended up almost losing the company because the AI company that does real estate and values houses, and the AI algorithm went a bit rogue and started really messing up the algorithm. So they were buying and selling houses for ridiculous prices and losing money hand over fist, and they had to sack most of their staff, and they almost went under. So that's because the board didn't know. So every board should understand it, and every board needs to be thinking, what is our enterprise? It has to come from the top. What's our enterprise AI strategy? How is it connecting to our 3-year business plan? Are we building AI capabilities that sustain competitive advantage, or are we just keeping up, which I think a lot are? Is AI going to change our industry's dynamics? And are we positioned to win? And even things like, what percentage of our R&D budget is AI enabled? What returns are we seeing? Are we investing in AI tactically through all these pilots or strategically? What are the regulatory risks? A lot of them don't even know what they're doing, and they don't know the risks, and they're responsible. They're the ones holding the bucket if something goes wrong. So they need to know how to mitigate those. They need to know what the dependencies are that could basically create competitive vulnerabilities. And they need to make sure that their AI governance is meeting all of the compliance obligations. And there's different roles depending on which board member. I actually remember in my course, I broke it down to loads of different board roles and what they needed to be thinking about. But really, I think it's a board strategic oversight role.
But that's very clear. My next question is about your advice to the board of directors. And I think, now you of course gave a big part of it. And I think in the beginning you mentioned that there's a lot of maybe board members whose kid, they come in, they show them the ChatGPT, and now they really want to do something. So what advice would you give them on top of what you actually just mentioned?
Sure. Well, if we break it down like, the CEO, so their primary AI accountability is, I'd say to them, look, you own the enterprise AI strategy. You are the one that has to ensure that it's going to create sustainable competitive advantage. Your job isn't managing AI projects, but it's ensuring that AI is going to transform the business performance at the enterprise level. So for them, their focus on this should be AI as a competitive weapon. Are we seeing doubling of our R&D productivity and success rates? They have to be making sure that they're capturing the advantages as a business. They also need to be on top of the cultural change. They are the ones that have to lead. So they need to champion AI adoption and really break down these silos. And they're also accountable for articulating the business impact to the stakeholders, which are often shareholders in pharma companies. So their kind of decisions are things like they need to start with a proper AI strategy. they need to appoint enterprise AI leadership that have budget authority. They need to establish the AI governance, basically spans every business function, and, make decisions on core capabilities and set the metrics and the accountability, which of course we do all of that in the strategy. And then the CFO's got a different role. So obviously they need to ensure that the investments are generating returns while navigating the financial risk with emerging technology. So they need to be looking at the return on investment and the portfolio management. You want your investments to grow. The role that they have is to make sure that they're creating shareholder value. So the traditional finance ROIs tend not to work for AI. So they need to be looking at the direct cost savings from the automation and the efficiency gains, the revenue acceleration, faster time to market, the risk mitigation, regulatory compliance, quality, and strategic option value for competitive positioning. So, their sort of decisions are things like establishing a ROI measurement framework or optimizing the AI investment portfolio, managing the relationships and the contracts. I guess that's the lawyers, but still, and from an investment point of view. I mean, I think the big challenge for the CFO is that they have the AI investment paradox to deal with, which is there's often a significant upfront investment with uncertain returns, even though we can kind of get the returns are based on what these other projects have done. But waiting for those returns is nerves of steel for them, I guess. And then, of course, you've got your head of R&D is going to really be important too, because this is such a big area with AI. So they need to be the one that's really ensuring that there's AI-enabled scientific innovation. I was working with one of the top 5 pharma companies in their R&D about 2 years ago. And so the head of AI for R&D was having a tough time convincing the 300 scientists that AI was going to be better than them and help them. And they could see it for some, but they couldn't see for a lot of areas. So he brought me in to basically show them what's happening and what sort of results their competitors are getting and other companies in that space, which really helped. But head of R&D is another really important person that's got to be prioritizing all of these. There's so many different things you can do with R&D and AI, and making, what's going to give us the best help get there faster and more accurately, more success, and deciding, we're going to build it or we're going to partner, how we're going to do this, and making sure that they're creating these AI-enabled clinical development stages. When I did the course, I had so many other people, but it's different depending on who it is, because they've got different responsibilities, different levels of risk tolerance, different success metrics, different time horizons, and different accountability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Andrée, you mentioned that you have these training courses for executive board of directors.
Yeah.
But also hints at, and you also explain how they have a lot of accountability, responsibility. But how do you see the AI literacy among the top leadership in the biopharma? Because if the literacy is not there, then a little bit in a tough spot.
Yeah, and I think that's I've written a lot on LinkedIn about this. I do think that not just that the C-suite, I think everyone needs to become AI literate, but especially the C-suite, because the buck stops with them. It's their company responsibility. So I do think that the boards need to become, and I get it. I run a company, I'm not an expert in everything, and I've got experts in all sorts of areas that work for me. I'm not an expert financial modeler like Othman, but I still need to understand what's involved in the models. I think that's the problem. When you're running a company, there's so many different roles and you've hired experts. So you kind of would like to go, well, let's just leave it to them. And I think that a lot of pharma boards are doing that, saying, okay, well, I'll get the CTO on it, or I'll get the chief innovation officer on it. But they themselves need to also be involved heavily and understand what's going on, because ignorance isn't a defense.
But at what level do you need that literacy just to hammer this topic? I mean, do you need to follow the LLM model development, reasoning ability, whatever? Or is it more higher levels?
I think it's higher level. So in the trainings that we do for pharma, I actually explain all the different types of machine learning with apples and bananas. So all the different techniques. It's very easy to explain these things very simply if you understand them. So I think having a basic understanding is important, because then you can know where things are going wrong or if someone's fudging something. I'm not a data scientist, but I can see if something's not quite right, because I understand them enough to know. And I think that giving them an understanding of all the different things that are out there, including digital twins, synthetic data, because I see a lot of misinterpretation about digital twins in the industry. They think a deep fake is basically a digital twin. If someone makes a deep fake of themselves, they say, oh, I've got a digital twin. That's not a digital twin. That's a deep fake. An ethical deep fake, maybe if it's of yourself, but it's still not a digital twin, which is a very different thing. I think it's really having an understanding of all the different things that are going on in the space and rough understanding of how machine learning works, what the different things are, how LLMs work. They don't have to code. They don't have to be data scientists. They don't have to be financial modelers, but they have to have a pretty overall understanding of what's going on to be able to manage this.
That was a great answer. If I'm a leader in a pharma organization, is there any low-hanging fruit I can pick today when it comes to AI?
Yeah, there's lots. In fact, when we do a strategic blueprint, we always divide it into quick wins and, longer term initiatives. So there's lots of different things. I think the fastest quick wins are in regulatory, clinical document preparation and medical affairs. And why that works as a low-hanging fruit is that there's so much human time involved, weeks to months for a lot of the different processes that they do. And a lot of the Gen AI tools, and there's lots of very specialized Gen AI tools, and sometimes we're just creating quite a few for clients at the moment, but you can also get off-the-shelf tools that do a lot of these different things. And so it's kind of a low risk. You still have the human in the loop. You're augmenting the human. You're not replacing them. So it's much faster. You can get 40% faster regulatory submissions, 50% improvement in cost efficiency across regulatory, for example. And there's no infrastructure dependencies. So they don't need big IT spend to create data lakes or anything else. It's the data, public data that they use. They're looking at literature data. They're looking at, ASEAN and World Health Guidelines and things like that. So those sort of things are really, really low hanging fruit. I think all of those document generation, document checking, all of that sort of thing in those areas.
Yeah, that has been a very practical and a specific focus area. So that's great. And I think now just to close it with a prediction, and I mean, you already gave a little bit of a prediction in the same horizon. How do you see AI in the pharma industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And do you think it will fundamentally change the industry as it is?
Yes. My answer is yes. Yes. But in short, I think it will fundamentally change everything. So in the next 5 years, I think we're going to start to see a huge proportion of new drugs that are going to be AI discovered. I think that's going to really ramp up because it's so fast. We're also going to see fully AI discovered drugs reach the market because we have already got fully AI discovered drugs that are almost in the market. So that's going to speed things up. I think that clinical trials will be a lot more, and there's already a lot of AI in clinical trials in many companies. And because the huge cost savings and timeline reductions, I think that will become much more widespread. I think that the regulatory agencies will be establishing much clearer guidelines. So I have so many clients, we talk about different things and they always want to know what the regulators think. And that's becoming clearer. I've actually had FDA people on my podcast. So they, particularly the FDA, I think are quite forward thinking on this. I think the other agencies are lagging a little behind the FDA on it, but that's becoming clearer. I think, well, by 10 years, it's kind of exciting. There's so many different things. I mean, I have this vision that once we get our own digital twins, so all three of us, everyone listening has a digital twin, which is basically a digital version of our biochemistry, then that's going to change everything. We won't need any humans in clinical trials because we can do it on their digital twins. It's a more complex version, but do you remember, well, maybe you don't, many years ago, cars used to be crash tested in person and they'd actually crash the cars, whereas that changed to mathematics. So it's a little bit, that's a very simplistic example, but once we have digital twins, all of these drugs can be tested that way. We've already got 3D printing of drugs, and we've got other even more interesting printing techniques that you can do at scale, even more than 3D printing, that are coming out now. So I feel that, and this will be controversial, I don't think eventually pharma will have manufacturing. I get a lot of pushback on this one because I feel that if we've got digital twins, we will be discovering the drug and licensing the molecule almost like a cookbook. Here's how you do it, and here's the ingredients. Like the HelloFresh or one of those companies that deliver the ingredients and the recipe. And so the doctor will be able to test the drug on our digital twin, send the formula to the pharmacy who will 3D print it or whatever printing technology they do, specifically for that individual's biochemistry. So I think that, I don't know if that's 10 years or 20 years, but if the digital twin prediction comes true in 10 years, then that's kind of the world we're heading to, I think, which would be great for saving money for manufacturing, things like that. But yeah, I think it'll be a very different one. And I also think that the business model will also have to change as you can imagine. I mean, also the operating model, at the moment it's like very sequential: discovery, preclinical, clinical, regulatory, commercial. I think it will be much more parallel processing of a lot of different things. And at the moment, things are very hypothesis driven, but it will be very just data driven. The data will tell us what's going on. And I think also, at the moment, everything's quite siloed in a company, whereas I think Novo have done some interesting things in this space, but I think it'll be much more networked where they will be collaborating with ecosystems of different companies. And then I think the company structure will have to change. There'll be new roles in companies. We'll have AI human interface specialists and algorithmic biologists, all sorts of things like that. But I wrote a few years ago about where I think the business model changes could go. And I was a bit provocative. I came up with a lot of different things, but there's so many different things that we could do in terms of changing the business model. And one of the things I think we need to think about is going towards prevention and rather than just sickness, because we now can predict over 50 types of cancer in people with a single blood draw with AI. So that's happening. A company called Grail have been doing this for a few years now with 90-something% accuracy, and they did clinical trials in 330,000 people. They're highly accurate. So the diseases out there are going to be much less because we'll be predicting illness so much faster before it gets bad. We probably won't have third line cancers eventually, or even second line, maybe, not even first. It'll be so fast to get the prediction and treat. So I think that's going to change a lot of the dynamics, because at the moment it's very illness focused and disease, as many patients in there taking the drug, whereas there's not going to be that many patients if AI goes the way it's going with prevention. So we need to start thinking about evolving your model in a different way. And we need to also think about, we've got so much data and we've got so much knowledge that we probably as an industry should be thinking about monetizing that somehow. New revenue streams from monetizing AI generated insights about disease progression or treatment response or patient populations or, things like that. So I think it's going to be a very different world. And I think that companies that really start to integrate it across their entire value chain, rather than just these pilotitis, spray and pray, are the ones that are going to get there. And the companies that are just doing these random things and isolated pilots that they can't scale or resisting it because they're too scared and they're waiting to see what happens, they're going to really lose, basically. My view.
It also sounds like, first, that the future we are heading towards is really true science fiction, but also that the level of transformation that companies have to think about and how they might have to adjust their business models is also fairly complex.
Yeah, it really is. And I, when you say science fiction, so much that exists now would have been science fiction 10 years ago. So I can give you some examples like Neuro or Neuro.world. So Francois Gand is the CEO of that company. I've had him on my podcast twice because I just think what they're doing is astounding. So he had a lot of tragedy in his life where a lot of people in his family ended up paralyzed. And they couldn't communicate because they were so paralyzed. So he wanted to be able to communicate with them. So he was a computer scientist. He developed a company where people who've got they can't even move their eyes, can communicate through their thought. So he's got this, it's like a headband, plastic headband, and you put it on, and within an hour, people with locked-in syndrome, people on life support machines who actually are thinking, can communicate. And so I think Cedars-Sinai Hospital, a lot of the American hospital networks actually are now starting to roll them out.
Wow.
But that we would have thought was, how can you communicate with someone who is completely locked in through a headband? It's kind of like the Elon Musk Neuralink concept, except non-invasive. So, and then another science fiction one, there's a company called Cortical Labs, and I met the founder of that company. And what they do is they grow human brain cells on computer chips. I had him on my podcast too. And he's taught these human brain cells to do things, augmenting the computer chip. And what he's found is he can run is actually keeps them in like a briefcase kind of size box. And it's got blood flowing to them. It's got oxygen. So like it would in the body. And he can run computers on them. And so actually the CTO of Amazon flew to Australia, where this guy is in Melbourne, because they're thinking of running their server farms on human brain cells, which are really energy efficient. And that makes me think about what Francois Gand is doing in digital twins, because the big challenge we have with digital twins is that at the moment, because the human body is so complex with all the processes, we need supercomputers to run them. So my challenge was, well, how can we have our own digital twin when if we don't all have a supercomputer to run it? But I think that what will probably happen, again, people will think I'm crazy, but I'm used to that, is that we will have a headband like the Francois Gand headband from Neuroworld, and it will be conducting the electricity from our brain into powering different things that we have, which is really energy efficient. And if you think that one brain cell can power these things now, can you imagine how much collective energy our brain could bring out? So I think we're going into a really, really interesting time in the next decade or so.
It almost sounds like we are almost there. So I'm going to correct my statement. I think we're almost in science fiction.
We're already in partial science fiction for sure. Yeah.
So now to try to wrap it up, because we discussed really a lot and we are coming towards the end. Is there anything we didn't discuss that you feel like we should particularly mention at least?
Sure. I think one aspect we should mention is the human element. So it's the human element that really determines the success or failure of pharma initiatives, and the human and the cultural transformation that, we need to make it work, and the change management. So what I see is that most pharma AI failures aren't technical, they're human. And so I've seen companies that have got brilliant AI, but it's not used because people aren't using it, or, the scientists have spent decades doing it in a particular way and they just don't trust it. So that's one aspect. I think as an industry, we're trained to be skeptical. So it's that trust and adoption thing as well. And it's important we're skeptical because it's essential for patient safety. But sometimes that skepticism can become a barrier to AI adoption. And so we need to be able to build informed trust and help people understand what it can do and what it cannot do, so they can use it effectively rather than just rejecting it entirely. And then regulatory, we've already touched on this, but I think it deserves emphasis that we've got this evolving relationship with the regulatory agencies and AI. And so the FDA, significant increase in drug applications that have AI components, but there's still lots of companies that are uncertain about how to discuss this with the regulators. And I think the regulators basically want to understand how AI is contributing to it. They don't want you to hide it. So, I think companies need to proactively engage with the agencies and share what they're doing with the AI and the validation and build that trust. And
so
then
really
I guess
change management and communication.
Yeah, and trust and human in a loop is important, making sure that the human is making some decisions, checking the AI. There was that famous case with IBM with Memorial Sloan Kettering years and years ago, where IBM Watson brought out AI to make predictions on what treatments different cancer patients should get. And they got it really wrong. And it was the doctors that saw that this is not right. Yeah. So you always need a human in the loop. Something could have gone wrong with something. You need to make sure that there's a human in the loop for sure. So I think now we're at this inflection point. We've got the technology. It's proven its potential. It's still really growing, but the early adopters are already seeing big benefits. But there's a lot of competitive pressure because everyone's doing it now. And I think that window for strategic AI advantage is starting to narrow. And so I think companies need to start getting a bit more strategic about this, connect it to their business outcomes, invest in building the sustainable capabilities they need and turning it into a competitive advantage that's going to be lasting. So it's not just an experiment, it's basically something they need.
That's very clear. And I think I'm going to sound funny, but I'm going to give the kudos to Simon because he dug it up in somewhere in your bio. So a fun fact, your bio says that you are a pilot who loves flying both airplanes and helicopters as a hobby, which is something we have here for the first time. So how did that come around? Is it the technology? Is it the freedom that you had there?
Well, I grew up flying because my father had a private pilot's license as well. And so I know I got my airplane license when I was 18 because I wanted to be able to fly places without my father. So, in fact, a lot of female pilots I know have fathers who have a pilot's license. They may not be, my father wasn't a pilot, but he was a private pilot. So that's kind of what got me into it was my father. But I also love the freedom. And so he didn't fly helicopters, he flew planes. And so I started with airplanes. But when I was learning to fly, there was a helicopter training school next door to us on the airport. And I used to look at the helicopters and I'd think, oh, I'd love to do that. And it used to be, I'd see these helicopter pilots spend hours just trying to get the hover right, to just a meter above the ground. And I think, why is it so difficult? Now I know. You've got so many different elements to balance, like the rotors are actually on this 360-degree thing, not just going round and round. It goes in every direction. You've got the pedals, you've got the governor, you've got the throttle, you've got the control column, you've got all these different elements, and any little gust of wind, even if you can't even feel it, it's changing the balance. But it's really cool the way they teach you as a helicopter pilot. You, of course, have to do all the physics and all of the other different exams, but you are taught in a way that it's like riding a bike. So it used to frustrate me when I first got my helicopter license about 15 years ago. And I remember when I was learning, just hovering was now, it brought me back to when I used to watch other helicopter pilots do this. It's really hard because they don't tell you what to do. And I said, what do I do? And they say, you have to feel it. And I'd be like, feel it. Tell me what to do. And it is a feeling thing because you're feeling the balance of all these different elements. But now, even if you haven't flown for a while, it's like getting on a bike. You get in the helicopter, it's all feeling it. You still have to know your emergency procedures. And I do love, I think I'm also an adrenaline junkie. I like skiing, I like flying, and I like engine failure practice. So with airplanes, it's called a forced landing, but you also have it with helicopters. With airplanes, I used to love doing it in tomahawks, which is a particular type of airplane that's got a high T-tail. So as soon as you exceed the angle of attack, you plummet. The nose goes straight down in a dive, and you are weightless for a little while if you haven't got your seatbelt on. It's quite exhilarating. So I love that. And with helicopters, you have it as well, but there's been so many deaths with forced landings with helicopters that legally we have to do it with another pilot in the helicopter now.
It's
Yeah.
impressive. And now the usual section, we always ask the guest, what have you been reading lately? Are there any great reads you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, I'm going to do a plug for a book series of a friend of mine, Anastasia Latterbach. So she is a professor of AI, and she's done a whole book series called Romy and Roby. And so Romy is actually her cat's name, and Roby is robot. And it's actually written for children to learn about AI. And because we're friends, I was fortunate enough to be one of her test cases in the early pre-readings before she published. And they're such great books. And she wanted it to be really educational and interesting for kids, but really teach hard concepts about AI and also make it entertaining for the parents if they're reading it to the children. And I tell you, so many times there were things I learned as well, but there were so many times in those books that I just burst out laughing because they've got all these little jokes in them that you, as an adult, you get, but the children would. They're really good. They really explain AI for young children, but there's a lot for adults. So it's Romy and Roby. There's a series of them. I recommend them.
I think the topic of AI, it's very relevant. So great recommendation. And maybe the executives or people below them, they can read it to their kids and they can learn together.
Great Christmas present.
Yes. So to wrap it up, we will, of course, link to your work discussed today. We will also link to the books and your podcast and your company. But the last thing left is if people want to reach out to you, what would be the best place to do so?
Well, 2 places. I'm on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Dr. Andrée with 2 E's Bates on LinkedIn. So you can always find me there. And my company website has a contact us form. So if someone wants to get me, it's Eularis, EULARIS.com. And the contact us form, if you say you're trying to reach out to me, I will get it eventually.
Perfect. We will put those in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Andrée.
You're welcome.
So, Simon, this has been our conversation with Dr. Andrée Bates. So what did you take away?
I think it was great to start opening the box of AI. You and I have been talking about it for a long time, and I think we managed to really get a very balanced, rational view on AI, which was what we intended. So I think we succeeded in doing that. And then I'm more hopeful and more enthusiastic actually about AI after we have had the conversation here, because I think it kind of brought a little bit down to practical level also for the rigorous return on investment discussions we had.
I fully share it, right? I'm definitely less skeptical now than I was before. And I think it has also been refreshing to hear some kind of maybe more realistic expectations of when AI will start to really deliver and so on. So I think it has been very refreshing to see someone who is not in the hype of it, believes in it, but is not in the hype of it. I think that has been very nice. And then go through some very practical steps on how to actually hopefully do it successfully.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we also traced sort of the historical timeline and over decades, and we discussed, at least from my point of view, I think that ChatGPT moment 3 years ago, roughly, I think that's one moment. And now we start to see this, maybe the first hype or the first wave kind of not imploding, but like there's a correction. Now we start to have a second round of pruning all our pilots that we discussed. That are more pilot projects in biopharma than there are real pilots in the airline industry. So I think that's kind of, we're looking towards that second round. We didn't have a chance to discuss it, but recently Johnson & Johnson also, they communicate around there now focusing their AI initiatives towards those with the best ROI. So I think it's quite refreshing that we now start to see real ROI discussions as the basis for driving AI strategies. And what do you think, Martin? How many more big bubbles will we see in the AI space in the next 3 years before we really start to have an uptake of real AI-driven value creation?
But putting me on the spot, I mean, it's very hard to say, right? It's very hard to say how big of a bubble is it now versus what is going to be true in 1 or 2 or 3 years from now. I mean, I think we discussed this before. There are companies that even Dr. Andrée mentioned, right? It's like there are companies now that are leading the space, like Recursion. And then you look at their share price and it's not yet there. I mean, it was there in the beginning, then the share price keeps going down. So it's not like the markets have been convinced yet. And now the question is, what is it going to take to be able to convince them? And what has to be true for that to occur, right? I have no good answer for this.
Yeah.
But I still feel like there has to be more of a tangible business case for that to be not a theory anymore, but really a practical example of, yes, it's there. Now let's just scale it to everyone else.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think for me, I would probably set a high bar. And again, coming back to our R&D productivity equation, I think if we start seeing real reduction in cycle time, in cost, improvements in probability of success, and I think before we have that, can make up that equation, I think we have to see maybe 25 or 50 assets moving through proof of concept with AI generated molecules, and that will take several years. And before that, we'll just have this sort of the anecdotes, not to belittle in silico medicines or recursion, but we have to see generate a quite large data set to really do the benchmarking and say, okay, AI really moves the needle on R&D productivity and our effectiveness as an industry. So I think that's still several years away, but hopefully we get some signals along the way.
But I think it has been still very helpful, even practical, right? I think she mentioned certain areas that every pharma company has, where in medical writing, right? It's like down to very practical aspects. There are certain things that are right now, as she mentioned, there's a lot of qualified people doing very manual, menial stuff. So I think I don't yet see the 50 to 70% reduction in the overall development timeline and the costs, right? But I can see that there are bits and pieces now that, how do we call it? Quick wins, right? There are bits and pieces there that could be easily a quick win that I think can probably easily be argued to generate an ROI. But I really like the perspective she had about, I mean, how do you then connect it to strategy, right? It's like, okay, on the one hand, you have something that creates value, but on the other hand, you shouldn't also just necessarily go and say, well, AI is good, so now I have to do something about AI. How do you then connect it to actual initiatives? So I would maybe go a little bit back when she mentioned that you first need to define what you want to achieve and then see how can AI help you there. And I actually think that was insanely practical, right? It's like, you shouldn't go and you have a hammer, so now everything is a nail and you're going to be bouncing on it. You should first see whether there's some nail you need to address. And then you see, well, hammer is the tool I need for it, right? I think this is a very healthy way in which it should be approached. Yes, there is value. And yes, probably there is a huge future in it, but there should be a very disciplined way on how it should be approached rather than just randomly going around and saying, well, AI is great, so I'm going to do something about it because I have to.
No, I completely agree. And I think, so let's maybe move away from that, all the pilots, the spray and pray approach, and then start our AI strategy with a disciplined approach anchored in rigorous ROI assessments, because Dr. Andrée, she clearly showed it's possible. And that's probably the most rational way to address it and move forward, and not just destroy value in trying these pilots all over the place. And also because I think that, again, the literacy overall in the industry is still on the rise. So also among executives and board members. So that's probably the best advice we can take away from this episode, and yet still very practical. Yeah, but I think we're definitely not done with AI. This was just the opening chapter of discussing AI in biopharma on this podcast. So we'll definitely bring in more AI experts like Dr. Andrée Bates.
I fully agree. I think this is a chapter we just opened and we have to continue with it. But it was also very good to have someone like Dr. Andrée on board that has the experience, extensive experience, working with other companies and approaching this. So I think it is a good door opener into the space. And I think now in almost every episode, we have been saying that, yes, there is technology, but maybe we need to be skeptical of how much value it can create. I think now we see there's value. Now it's maybe a question of how do we get there, right?
And I think now we had 2 episodes in a row. The last episode was around the Chinese biotech industry and how that will change the operating model in pharma for good. Now we had AI. We also agree that will change the operating model in biopharma for good. So there's a lot more to unpack.
And now that we are approaching summer, this is going to be the last episode until we are back after the summer.
Maybe summer is a good time to catch up on episodes you have not yet listened to or watched. You can do it on the beach. Also, there's a lot of reading recommendations along the way as well. But please join our LinkedIn group. Just search for Cures and Capital. Please subscribe there, and also subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And we are very grateful for all the feedback you have provided. So please keep your feedback coming. We want to improve what we deliver to you. And we're also very happy if you could suggest potential guests for future episodes. Just DM me or Martin. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the summer.
Bye.
Bye.